Once our rafters are returned to the original numbered position, I use my clamps to hold them steady whilst I fix them in place with our heavy 14 gauge timber screws. We're adding one of the blocks we prepared earlier between each one of the rafters. You can see how I have a scrap piece of timber attached to the top of the block.
You come and go like a monsoon rain. You hide and show like a lightning bolt. You have it all.
In this video series, I take you through the process of how we created this backyard art studio. It features 3 large windows and glass doors to allow natural light to fill the interior. It also includes an outdoor covered awning space with a hardwood batten privacy screen. We chose to use passive house design systems in the construction to make the most of the year-round weather conditions. In the last episode, we constructed and raised the frames for the second and third walls and fixed them in place with liquid nails and bolts held into the concrete with a 2-part epoxy. In this episode, we'll be preparing the rafters for the roof frame, which we'll be pre-painting to make things easier later in the process. Late last night, I finished the principal framing for the walls. Let's go take a look at some of the details. The other 3 walls we built flat on the concrete and raised them. This last wall, it was just easier to build it in place. So last night I finished putting in the last of these studs. The reason we've got a big gap here is because we've got some doors and windows coming. We're not exactly sure where the door's going to go. So I've just left this open. We know the door's going to be somewhere in this area, so I can keep my construction moving along. I know there's a large window going here, but I've added temporary studs and fixed them with screws I can back out easily. So when the windows show up, we can measure them out and rebuild the rough opening underneath the top plate of our wall. The main reason why I put temporary studs in the wall is so I can get the roof built. So hopefully by the end of today, I'll have some rafters laid out on the top of our roof structure. The first step in building the last wall vertically in place was to make sure the 2 standing walls were completely vertical and plumb. Then lock them into place with 2x4 braces. I then established the angle we need to cut the studs at to account for our raked roof. After transferring this angle to my saw, I cut the studs for each end of the wall and then cut the top plate. I'm gluing the studs for each end of the wall because later in the building process we'll be connecting beams to the overhanging awning on these corners. I then added the rest of the studs for the wall, starting in the center and working my way out and leaving a gap for the door that'll be showing up later. Before completing the framing details on the opposite wall, I need to do some final calculations for the rafter we have temporarily in place. By setting it into its final place on the 2 walls, I can set some plumb lines with my level and pencil. This will be a guide for the bird's mouth cutouts we'll be doing for all 14 of the rafters. I remove it and put it aside on my saw horses. Later I'll be turning this into a template for the rest of the rafters. Because the design of our studio has 2 eaveless walls, this end wall has a rafter directly on top of it, so is technically a non-supporting wall, as the cantilever rafter carries the weight of the roof. This is why it has a different framing configuration from the previous wall we completed. I cut a small stud to size with the angle that'll support the top plate for this wall. I then fill out the top of the wall with stiffeners to help support the final rafter of our roof.
Oh, I will open up my eyes so I can see the light. Oh, and I'll try to spread my wings so I can fly. Oh, and the darkness starts to fade. Feels like things are gonna go my way. I'm gonna let the sunshine in the day.
framing's complete for this wall, I do one last double check with a string line and some packers to make sure the rake of the wall is completely flat and plumb in preparation for the rafters we'll be laying later. We'll be constructing our roof frame out of 6 metre long, 190 by 45 mm pieces of structural timber. More than half of our rafter material needs to be used in continual lengths to create the cantilevered awning overhang on the front of the building. The rest of the rafter material will be used as blocking for structural support between the rafters, and these pieces will be cut into much shorter lengths. So an important part of our preparation is to sort through all our rafter material stock and establish which pieces are the straightest so they can be used for the continual lengths of timber for our roof structure. We've laid out all the rafters on the driveway so I can check the crown for each one and mark them accordingly with my pencil. I use a simple system of drawing a bent line in the direction the wood's curved. This way later in the process I can easily reference which way the wood is naturally bent. After completing the crowning process for all the timbers, I move on to the next step of marking out where we'll be trimming the rafters to get them closer to their final length. I've cut a template that represents the final length of the rafter. This way I can slide it back and forth over the stock piece and decide which end to trim off. After marking and trimming all the timbers, we neatly stack them closer to where we'll be needing them for the next step in our process.
I'm gonna let the past be filled with smoke, and I will try to fix what has been broken, and take this weight off my shoulders, cause I know yesterday ain't coming back. I'm gonna let the past stay in the cold. I will listen to the ocean, let its unsaid words be spoken, and I'll let my mind be carried by the waves.
Before we start cutting all the rafters to the exact size, I'm going to check our template rafter fits all the way across the length of our roof. The safest way to do this is to check the rafter in its true position. The rafters are fixed to the walls at 2 points. One end sits flush with the lower wall that's eaveless, and the other end sits on the higher wall for the cantilevered overhang that'll create the awning for the north side of our studio. It looks like the rain is settling in for the day, so I'm going to reconfigure my temporary shelter. This way I can create a rainproof space that's big enough for the 5.5 metre rafters. My system for cutting the 14 rafters is to clamp the template to the uncut rafter and transpose the notches across from one side to the other. The notch for the high wall that creates the cantilever is quite shallow, so I'm using a handsaw for a more accurate cut. After doing a series of cuts about 10 mm apart from each other, I remove the excess material with my chisel. For the tail end of the rafter, I use my set square to mark out lines so I can place my saw guide in the right place to slice off a small piece of the bottom of the rafter.
Oh, I will open up my eyes so I can see the light. Oh, and I'll try to spread my wings so I can fly. Oh, and the darkness starts to fade, feels like things are gonna go my way. I'm gonna let the sun shine in the day.
Because our roof rafters are going to be exposed in the final version of our studio, it's practical to paint them before assembly. I'm applying a primer undercoat and 2 coats of the green my client has selected. It's a lot easier painting materials like this on a sawhorse than it is in their final position. It'll also help keep the rafters waterproof until we can get the corrugated iron roof on later.
Now everything that has been don't matter no more. We've burned it. All those whirlwinds can't touch us no more.
weight of the rafters on the top of our walls, I want to complete some engineering elements. The most effective way to keep walls square and sturdy is to add diagonal cross bracing. I'm installing this bracing in the last stud void of each wall. To start this process, I'm removing the temporary cross braces so I can re-rack the walls into perfect vertical plumb. The temporary braces I'm removing now kept the walls square during the process of bolting and gluing them to the concrete. An effective way of adjusting the square on our walls is to use a ratchet strap secured on the diagonal. This way I can easily adjust the amount of tension I need to pull the wall into vertical plumb. I have my spirit level clamped to the end of the wall, so I can easily tell when the wall's adjusted into complete square. When I'm satisfied the bubble in the level is completely vertical, I do one last double check on the other side of the wall before moving on to the next step. I'm starting the bracing panel with a centerpiece that's in alignment with the blocks in the wall next to it. I'm using liquid nails and 14 gauge heavy timber screws to make a solid connection. By combining horizontal blocks with blocks set at 45 degrees, the wall will remain solid in its square position. When the bottom half is complete, I add a temporary brace to stabilize the wall whilst the glue dries. I can now remove the ratchet strap so it can be used on the next wall.
Come closer, dance for me. Easy, tiger, easy, let your hair down. Come closer, let me see all your million faces and all your million mistakes. You don't need to hide. Come closer so that we can be together. Everything that has been don't matter no more. We've burned it.
For the next stage of our construction, we need access to the top of our walls. So I'm going to improvise some scaffolding with materials we have on site. I'm using a combination of pallets that some of the material is delivered on, and some planking I won't be needing until close to the end of our build.
Can I go to sleep, buried in my chair? The only thing that's left. If you have love, you wanna give me some, and I will wait for someone else to come. It's sad, but it feels right.
Because of the design aspect of having an eaveless roof on the south side of our structure, all the tail end of our roof rafters need to be cut flush with the wall framing. The most accurate way to achieve this is to hang all the rafters in place on top of the roof. This way I can temporarily secure the rafters to the top of the wall and scribe the cutoff with a spirit level. This will ensure we get a completely flat transition between the wall and the roof elements when we add the sheeting material later. After marking where the tail of the rafter will be cut off, I number it so we can return the rafter to its correct position later.
Breaking feedback. Oh yes, I'm gonna stay right here. Stay until it disappears.
When all the rafters have been positioned for scribing, I move on to moving our temporary shelter for the last time. I'm using my wrecking bar to leverage it up so we can fit the small pieces of pipe underneath the walls and then roll it out of the way. I have windows arriving tomorrow. I need to get the temporary shelter in its final position so we can keep the windows out of the weather until they're ready for installation. I've added some 2x4s to the temporary shelter so we can securely strap the windows to them to keep them safe from the wind. We're also adding a lot of packing material to keep them protected. The final step is to wrap them in a tarp so they're waterproof until we need them. With the windows secured, we return to working on our roof frame. The roof frame has two timber elements, the rafters and the blocks that go between them. The blocks are cut out of the same stock material we used for the rafters, which is 190 by 45. I'm cutting them out of the 6-metre planks that weren't straight enough to be used for rafters. I need to cut over 50 blocks at a length of 554 millimetres. The most efficient and accurate way to do this is to set up a saw stop on the bench. I start this process by cutting a template piece at our 554 mil. After the cut, I double check it with my tape measure. After establishing the template block is exact to the millimetre, I secure a block of timber to the saw bench with a clamp to work as a gauge to enable me to cut the 50 blocks accurately and easily. I stack them off to the side for use later when we're assembling the roof frame. To trim the rafter tails, I've set up a production line so I can efficiently cut them all in one session. I've picked a location on the job site to make it easy for us to put the rafters back on the roof when I've completed the cuts. To set up for the saw guide, I make marks 100 mil to the side of where we scribe the rafters on the roof. I align the saw guide to the pencil marks and double check the measurement, clamp it in place, and then make the cut with my circular saw, holding it firmly to the edge of the saw guide. After completing the cut, I move the rafter off to the side and repeat the process on the next one. After the painting of the rafters is complete, I start preparing for their installation. We've been using the temporary shelter to get the blocks painted during the recent rain.
Peel off a layer and breathe. Lift up your head and lead. Count the stars up before you leave. Save a kiss, pretty please. Try to reminisce over me.
After stacking the pre-painted blocks in a convenient area for our assembly, we start the process of putting the rafters back on the walls. Once our rafters are returned to the original numbered position, I use my clamps to hold them steady whilst I fix them in place with our heavy 14-gauge timber screws. We're adding one of the blocks we prepared earlier between each one of the rafters on the eaveless side of the wall. When we complete the whole eaveless side of the wall, we'll be adding blocks to the cantilevered overhang section of the roof. You can see how I have a scrap piece of timber attached to the top of the block to help lock it and keep it in position whilst we clamp it in place between the rafters. I use my rubber hammer to tap the block into alignment and then fix it in place with one of our screws.
Tonight we'll turn minutes into days. And nothing's gonna make me look away. Peel off a layer and breathe. Lift up your head and lead. Count the stars up before you leave. Save a kiss, pretty please. Try to reminisce over me. Know that I will cherish your memory.
When working on my own like this, I use a lot of clamps to hold the materials in the exact position whilst I fix it in with a screw. When the raft is secure, I remove the clamp and the temporary piece of timber on the top of the block, and then move on to the next rafter and repeat the process.
Peel off a layer and breathe. Lift up your head and lead. Count the stars up before you leave. Save a kiss, please. Try to reminisce over me. Know that I will cherish your memory.
With all the blocking complete on the southern wall, we move our attention to the north wall with the cantilevered overhang and start adding the blocks there. Here you can see how the scaffolding we built earlier enables me to stand it at a convenient position for the assembly of these blocks on the front cantilever. This large clamp I'm using that spans 2 rafters is an important part of the assembly process. Wide planking material, like the rafters are made out of, always has slight cupping on the surface due to the wood grain. To account for this, I use the large clamp to create as much compression as I can between the 2 rafters. By repositioning the clamp for each fixing point, I ensure there's no gaps between the 2 rafters and the edge of the block.
Quiet voices in the night. Time is running out of sight. Lonely wind is passing by, tries to carry all the whispers that it finds. The walls are listening when we talk, making echoes as we walk. There's no one left but you and me. It's like a made-up place that only we can see. Hold my hand and hear the words I say. Close your eyes and let us fade away. Build a secret place for you and me. Let our minds be caught up in a dream.
Join me in the next episode as we continue the framing of the roof and start the construction of the veranda overhang on the side of the studio.
Could you hike back to it, fight with it, sit with it?